Good morning, good morning. How wonderful to see you both, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me this morning.
Pleasure. Nice to see you again, Lucy.
Yes, lovely to see you both too. I wanted to start by asking you to tell me a little bit about your background, and I'm going to start with Lisa. Tell me how you came to be working as an assistant for Knight Frank, and tell us a bit about what Knight Frank actually do.
Okay, so I started, Christy and I firstly have been friends for, 22 years now. I'm just thinking, I always go by the age of my son, who's 24. And we worked for WPP together. So that's sort of our background of how we knew each other. And I've always worked in the administration industry. So I've always been championing the administration role and the profession. So I've always worked as an EA, PA in various industries. And before I came to Knight Frank, I was working in Brighton, locally where I live, for Study Group. And so I was working there as the PA, temping. And when Christy phoned me and said, when are you going to come back to London? Because we miss you. And I'm working for Knight Frank and they've got a great role here. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm still waiting for Millie to go to senior school. Don't think the timing's right. And she's like, no, just come and have an interview. So I came and had an interview with John Snow, who was the head of commercial for Knight Frank at the time. And I went for the interview. And then obviously Christy, knowing me so well, realised that once I had the interview and came to the offices and saw the buzz of being back in London, that I wouldn't be able to refuse if I was offered the role. So that's hence how I started at Knight Frank, because Christy pulled me back in. So I then got the role as PA to the head of commercial. So that's how I got to Knight Frank.
Fabulous. And Christy, tell me a bit about your background. It sounds like you were there already. And tell me about Knight Frank itself, what it is that it does, because this is a global conference, so there'll be people in other parts of the world who won't know what Knight Frank is, I would have thought.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks, Lucy. So as Lisa said, we were friends way before at WPP. So my first ever job was as a PA in the digital arm of kind of an ad agency before we were taken over by WPP. And I went into it totally blind with no qualifications or experience at all. And I was so chuffed when I got the role, because I thought that I'd really achieved something. And basically that's where it started. And I was kind of, I guess, 20 years, is the calculation correct, in the kind of administrative profession. I left WPP. I went with my boss, who that time kind of branched off and wanted to start kind of a marketing startup agency in Covent Garden. And actually, spookily enough, Lisa had already left by then.
Yeah.
And was also working in Covent Garden. So we seem to follow each other wherever we go. So I went to the startup, and I then became kind of a PA plus jack of all trades. So there were only 4 of us in the office. And I had to become the accountant and the HR and the IT technician and everything all in one, which was incredibly daunting to start with. But actually, I think it was a really, really good experience for me. And it was probably a couple of years before the recession that I left and went and joined this startup. Unfortunately, due to the recession, the startup could kind of no longer carry on. And my boss was really apologetic at the time, but he said, my brother works at Knight Frank and his PA of 8 years has just left. Would you like to go there? And I, at the time, was, oh, what's Knight Frank? Never heard of them. And he said, well, it's commercial real estate. And I went, oh, that sounds really dull. But yes, I will go, because I had a 1-year-old son at the time. And, financially, we couldn't be picky or anything. So I went for the role. I knew I would love my boss at the time, and because I knew his brother and worked for his brother. But I did start Knight Frank, not entirely sure whether I would enjoy it. Coming from an ad agency where, I used to rock up in skinny jeans and sit with creatives and turn the radio on in the morning and be working on pitch documents until 2 in the morning. It's very different walking into what I thought was a really corporate world of Knight Frank. So I can't say I loved it when I first started. I think I ended up telling most of my team that at the time as well. But it was just a completely different culture to what I was used to, and that was 13 years ago. But I have to say, it has got better 13 years later, and they proved me wrong. So I started 13 years ago as PA and office manager in the capital markets department. We both work in the commercial side of the business. Knight Frank is well known for the residential side. It's a global real estate company. It's a partnership, so it's probably the last one standing. But we work on the commercial side, which is really interesting. Is people might say less glamorous than the residential side, but I have to say the people who work here. There are two reasons why I still work at Knight Frank after not really enjoying my first few weeks there. And one is definitely the people. I don't think I'd ever work anywhere where I don't genuinely enjoy the people I work with, not just through a professional aspect, but also personally getting to know them. But also the opportunity, which I'm sure we'll go on to, but the opportunity that you have within this business and within partnerships. I've never worked in a partnership before, so this might be true for other partnerships, but there is a wealth of opportunity for you to get involved in as much as you want. There's an appetite. There's a genuine encouragement from the equity partners who own this business for people to get involved and to add value in more places than one.
I love that. I really love that. Good. Thank you very much indeed. So I want to ask you, first of all, how the assistants were structured when you first got there. Let's go to Lisa first.
So, I mean, the structure as such was similar. We had EAs, PAs, team secretaries, team assistants, administrators. But I think what we found is in our roles, there was no sort of framework for development. So unless you wanted to develop, there were many a times, Knight Frank, as Christy says in the most articulate way, is a phenomenal place to work. It really is people focused. It's amazing. That's why people stay here for such a long time. And I suppose with Christy and I in our roles, there would always be a point where we think, right, what else can we do? And not just us, other PAs and EAs across the business, because you have all these opportunities to get involved in other things outside of your role, that you're like, oh, that's great, that's brilliant. But how does that then manifest itself into developing my role and my role getting bigger? And being recognised, more importantly, for that and the value that I add in my role. And so so it's very corporate in that way, that it used to be that the PA would look after a proprietary partner. So that would be a senior. You'll be looked at as a senior PA if you looked after a proprietary partner, and the proprietary partner is a partner that owns part of the business, is in part of the partnership. So those were scattered. So it was a very seniority, and it was very much about who you looked after is how your career developed. So the seniority of the individual that you looked after, your career would go there. But then there was nothing above that. So if you wanted to progress, you either had to leave and go into another role. There was no sort of journey for you within the role that you wanted to be. So after and as happy as people were, it gets to a stage where you have your appraisals and got some phenomenal support in the business, and they're saying, right, okay, great, you've done a fantastic job, just keep doing what you're doing. And like, okay, that's brilliant. What else? No, just keep doing what you're doing. And also for the stakeholders, the stakeholders really value their support, but didn't have much. They were like, well, what else can we give them? What else can, they're so phenomenal. We want to keep them in the business, but I'm not quite sure what I can say we can get them involved in. So it was a combination of both sides of the business. I think we have to say it wasn't just from our side that we saw a gap. It was, to support the stakeholders and the business itself, to say, actually, the value that these individuals bring, we want that to flourish. We want to be able to then develop. So that was sort of the structure as it was.
And was it a slow burn, Christy, or was there a kind of moment of revelation where you went, this was the catalyst that we needed to kick us into gear to go and do the thing?
Yeah, I think it was probably the latter, Lucy. Just to add a little bit to what Lisa's just said, for me, because I was in an operational role as well in my role at Knight Frank. For me, what really stood out also was that there were quite a lot of senior people within the business who were getting very involved in operational tasks. So for me, what I wanted to do in my role was to take those off my manager because he could add value elsewhere in his senior role. So for me, there was very much also, in addition to what Lisa has said, with the lack of kind of framework and stuff and development, there definitely also was an operational layer missing within the commercial business, which I think when we started talking, we're both really ambitious people. We have always been quite ambitious. We actually always said, Lisa, that we end up working together. Don't know if you remember that, but we did say that.
I don't.
Working together again, post-advertising years. But it very much, I think we both got to the point in our roles where, I had kind of done what I felt I could do. And I was 8 years in, and I felt that the department of kind of 75 people in commercial needed new ideas, needed someone else to come in. We were doing processes and working on quite a lot of stuff in the same way that I'd been doing for a long time. I was getting more involved in kind of the longer term planning side of it with my immediate boss. So, it wasn't a slow burner at the start. I think once we both started talking, and we had bosses at the time who were really supportive of everything that we were saying. And when we started talking properly and trying to, formalize it and build a business case around where we thought the gaps were and how we thought the structure could work really well for the commercial business, which will add value for the business, as well as all the kind of, I can't remember back then, 80 odd business support people within the commercial business. So we were looking at it from both sides. So that was it. That was pretty fast paced, I would say, in terms of us coming to that decision. I think it then became a little bit of a slow burner as we started to learn more about the business and how difficult, no, not difficult, complex it is to start bringing in some kind of change into a business which is already established of, circa 800 people. And bearing in mind it's a business that had done the same thing for a long period of time, it was definitely a case of educating. There's an education piece. But so it was an easy decision. It was a quick decision. We then worked on it furiously in our kind of personal time mainly, and built a business case together. And then as soon as we kind of got to the point of getting approval, then it kind of became a bit slower because we had so much to learn. I mean, we're naive to think. I mean, to be honest, we should look back at our business plan to start with and reread it, because I guarantee we'll pick holes into it. We'll pick holes in it and go, that's just waffle. We should have thought about this. We should have thought about, we went on an extraordinary learning journey afterwards.
And I think to add to that, what Christy said, what was really important for us is that we didn't want to leave Knight Frank. And I think that's really important to say. We loved it here. We loved the people. The culture has not changed. It's just in ways it's just embraced it more as the years have gone on, and authentically articulates why they look up. They do look after their people, and everything that's gone before has just authenticated that really has happened. And I think, for us, we were at a point in both our careers where we wanted something else. So we were like, what else can we do? We don't want to have to leave. So that's why then we took a step back and looked and thought, gosh, there are a lot of people like us. And also, I think what was really important to say during this period of time, Lucy, a lot of EAs were coming to us unofficially and asking our advice, and coming to us as mentors, because we had the ear, I suppose, of some senior people in the business as well. So we had to put that to, it was on us really to put that to good use, I feel, to give something back. So we were used to sit and have unofficial coffees and stuff with some great individuals across the business that are still here. And we thought, actually, there's something in this. There really is something in this. And so, yeah, as Christy said, you know, we started in a pub in Barnes when Christy lived in London at the time, talking over a glass of wine, like, you know, could we really do this? What would that look like? You know, this is, and reinforcing what Christy said, it is a real education, because real estate is quite, you know, historically is quite pale male stale, you know, and it is that image of the pinky rings, but actually, you know what, inside it, when you're inside it at Knight Frank, it couldn't be more different, the personalities, etc. there. So hugely supportive. And I think for us, it was really key as well for us to have male allies and advocates in the business, because you know, we doubted ourselves quite you know, a lot of the time we're in that forming. And I think we had two male advocates in Anthony Duggan, who was a mentor. And I remember going, once we started with our business case, we sort of, he would started at Knight Frank, and he was head of commercial, he was global sort of in the research area at the time. He's now our head of strategy, but he was a real counsel and wisdom and business focus. And so we handed him this rough document and said, look, what do you think? Can you go away honestly and look at this and think of what you think of it? This is the context behind it. This is why we're doing it. Do you think it's got legs, or do you think it's absolutely mental and you two need to go back to doing your day jobs? So we're like, so he went away and he came back and he said, look, it needs more work. It really definitely needs work, but you absolutely have to do it. It's a phenomenal idea, and yeah, absolutely, it will be massive, and I will help in any way I can. So, you know, that is a, you know, we talk about DE&I now, you know, it's huge, and advocates across the business and helping women develop. And I think this is a classic case for Christy and I, that everywhere we've had Christy and her box, Clacks, her boss now, Clacks, her previous boss, Peter McColl, my boss, John Snow, our boss, Stephen Clifton now, they have all been instrumental, as well as the whole business, in pushing us forward to get this delivered.
I think that's so wonderful. And obviously it's a real huge job, and a daunting job. And as you said, you've had to educate yourself as you go along. And, you know, my hope with this interview is that there will be a lot of assistants out there who will be thinking about it, but are nervous about pushing forward with it because of the reaction that they would get. And I know that you said you went and you met in the pub in Barnes, and you had, you know, you got buy-in from other people. But from a point of view of putting together that initial business plan, how did you do that? Because I think for many of the assistants out there, the kind of nitty gritty, if you like, as to what kind of things you need to put together to show your business case is something they will never have done before.
Definitely. And I think, you know, we were probably asking ourselves the same question, Lucy, at the time, and just muddling things together. But I think essentially, first of all, don't ever fear anything. You know, you might as well ask, because what's the worst that can happen? You know, we went into it thinking, do you know what, if they say no, they might just be saying no, not at this time. But actually it's not a rejection, but we will have planted a seed. So don't ever fear of doing something, because just think about what worst case scenario is what I tell my kids. Just think about worst case scenario, and, you know, then you'll go into it positively. Keep it simple is what I'd say to start with. I think keep it really simple to, you know, what is the issue? What are the challenges? Why are you even having these conversations? And write down what those challenges are. And also what I think we've both learned through our career is never go with a problem, because they don't want to hear problems. No. They don't want to have to think about it. They don't want to have to think of a solution. You can go with a problem as long as you've got the solution, because the solution piece of it is what they're most interested about. So even if you keep it simple with those two things, that's a really good starting point. And once you start getting it down in black and white, you'll then start thinking about other things. So that's the first thing that we did. And I'm trying to rack my brain actually what we did, but I'm thinking logically that we then started filling in the gaps between that, in terms of, okay, that's the challenge, but go into more detail, do a deeper dive. So then we looked at the whole employee life cycle from start to finish. Okay, we were both in similar roles but different roles. So I was also part of kind of, as a hiring manager, the interview process, for example. So between us, we could fill in quite a lot in terms of, if we looked at the whole employee life cycle from sending out a job description, bringing someone on board, to their onboarding, to their training, everything else. What does that look like? And where are the challenges in each of those areas? And how do we solutionize that? And that I don't know if you want to add anything, Lise, to that, but I think that keeping it simple in the starting.
No, and I think that life cycle has stayed with us. And actually, you can use that for a lot of things. It's like your journey. You know, what does your journey look like once you start at Knight Frank, or even before you're at Knight Frank, right? So, you know, if you look at that, those steps in that journey, you know that you want it to be best in class wherever that is, and you want to be able to retain and recruit the best diverse talent, right? So what does that journey, and it's not just for business support, it works for every, for any role. But once you're in their business, it's talent, it's talent acquisition, it's recruitment, it's then onboarding, it's then career development, hence framework, training, learning and development. It's then looking at, we talk about efficiencies for the business, operational. The majority of our business support in commercial are very operational and executive level. So they have a combination of hybrid, their roles are. So they look after executives, but they also look after the operational efficiencies of their department or their team, etc. So it's very much business focused skills rather than personal. So that was that. So we looked at operational efficiencies and where could that slot in on their journey as well, and develop those skills. And then of course, once you've got all of that, then you've got to look at profiling those people, right? And you've got these phenomenal people in the business. So how do you profile them? How do you get them out? How do you get them mobility across the business? And then you've got to reward and recognize them for doing that efficiently, for doing that phenomenal service. So I think in that employee life cycle, there's all those little pockets. So that was like our structure. So, you've got the employee life cycle, you've got the structure of the business, you've got the life cycle that you put all those people, and then, the job specs and everything fit in that organogram and structure. So I think we had those pockets of structure to work with. And I think the third point of that is, whilst working in the business, it can be Knight Frank specific, but we also, obviously, Lucy, and that's why we've known you for a number of years and sought your counsel, is like, you can do everything that you can within the business and the constraints of Knight Frank. What does that look like for Knight Frank? But you also have to ensure that what is the market telling you and what is out in the market, and making sure that we get counsel, and wisdom from you, Lucy, and from Lucy Chamberlain, lots of people, to make sure, look, are we on the right track as well? So as long as having mentors in the business, it's having mentors outside the business that are oracles in the administration industry that say, you're not stupid, you are on the right path, this is great, but actually, have you thought about this? And to challenge you, why are you doing it like that? Which, Lucy, I remember many times where we called you up and you were so great with your time, you are such a busy individual, but you were like, no, absolutely, let's jump on a call. And we'd be like, oh my gosh, we can't fathom this, how does that role work, or how does that fit in? So it was a number of years of a lot of, but that structure, going back to what Christy said at the beginning, if you get that structure right, take the people out for the moment and get the structure right and get the employee life cycle, and then put everybody back in and see what that looks like.
I think it's so interesting. And I think what Christy was saying about not coming with problems is so interesting too, because, I think for a lot of assistants, when I'm talking to them about restructuring, it turns into a moaning session. And this is wrong and that is wrong. And I think also for many assistants, they know what they want to say, but they don't have the business language to say it. And so they're scared about saying it. So from your point of view with the learning curve, would you say that you've learned the business terminology as you went along, or do you think you had that already because you were sat outside of the business?
No, we'd probably be talking at the same point here. I learned, Christy, I'll let Christy speak, but I definitely learned so much. John Snow, who was my first boss at Knight Frank, he taught me so much. Business goes at a certain pace, and there's no point fighting it. You have 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But if you understand the business and the reasons why it works the way it does, you will get there. But it is, it's not a sprint, and we learn that as well. You will get there if it's right and you're coming with the right solutions and it's really right for the business. It will happen, but you have to understand the business that you're in and understand the processes that go on there and work with the business as well, because, you know, this was just the two of us getting counsel and support. And yes, we did a lot in our own time, but when it grew legs, you know, when it was presented and said, right, okay, we can do this now, there was a whole massive team in Knight Frank that supported us to get this, to develop it, to launch it. And I think everybody that was involved in that, we learned from the different areas of the business, from HR, from learning and development, from operational, from the other side of residential side of the business as well, because they operate very differently. So I think we had a lot to learn. I think we felt quite naive, actually, realizing, wow, but it's so nice to look back and think, gosh, we have come a long way. But yeah, you absolutely have to just take that and absorb it, be like a sponge, and just take that as with the manner it's given to you. It's not a criticism, you know, it's people trying to help you and support you. So be a sponge and absorb it all that knowledge.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, you know, I don't think it matters if you go in not understanding the business tone and knowledge at all. You can absolutely be vulnerable in that and hold your hands up and kind of say, listen, I don't know everything about the business. But what you can go in with is being the expert in your profession and understanding how much value it's going to learn. I mean, how much value it's going to add. I mean, you know, when I can't remember who it was, it might have been Anthony saying, okay, what's going to be the ROI on your plan? And I'm like, what does that mean? Quickly Google, what does that mean? So, you know, return on investment, all this terminology, which I'd never really come across ever. Lisa may have done, but you learn as you go. But it's so okay to kind of say, Anthony, do you know what? We haven't really thought about that, but that is a really, really good thing. We'll go away and have a think about it and come back. I don't think you need to have the most perfect written business plan to go to your leaders with.
No.
You've got to have the basis of, you've got to go in with confidence in terms of what you think is right, and that's coming from where your specialism is, which is in as an administrative professional, and you understand where that value is going to be. You know, we're going to save fee earner time, we're going to develop our people, we're going to acknowledge the ones who are absolute superstars with this new structure, we're going to give everyone the support that they need that they haven't had before. So as long as you go in with that, you can absolutely learn the rest of it as you go, because that's exactly what we did.
And
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
wouldn't they want to do that, Lucy? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't any business want to encourage that and develop that?
I agree. I think it's so important to go in, though, with what's in it for the business as opposed to what's in it for the assistants. I think
Totally.
Initially, anyway, to get the buy-in, to go in and say, this is what the business is going to gain out of it. The stuff the assistants are going to gain out of it is obvious. And of course, later on down the track, that's where I think that piece goes in. But initially, them understanding what is in it for them and what's in it for the stakeholders is what's going to make their ears prick up and get them to start listening to you.
100%.
Totally.
Yeah. So were the assistants aware of that you were working on this plan for them? Or was it kind of behind closed doors? And what was their reaction when they found out? Was there suspicion or were they pleased?
Gosh, I think it's such a long journey. It's trying to think back, Lucy, to that. There were definitely individuals in the business support that knew, probably ones that we'd been mentored. We'd been mentors for them. That, you know, they had an inkling, and we talked about doing this and looking at the career framework, etc., and looking at their journey, because we also in the business case we used a case study of an individual in our business, Alicia, who she won't mind us mentioning, I'm sure, Alicia Clare. She was a phenomenal PA in the business and worked for the head of our healthcare business, Julian Evans, and she was actually a case study for us in our business case of why you would want to do this, you know, and that was the ROI on that. So Julian very kindly added some key points into that. So yes, there were definitely, we had to, because we had to give examples and we had to give context to it all. So there was definitely conversations, but as time went on, as it developed, you know, it had to be, there are some conversations depending on what you're developing, obviously are confidential, and I think it's not necessarily confidential that you can do, but you don't want to promise anything. You have to manage expectations. I think it's a real key point here, because quite for a long time we didn't know whether it was going to be rolled out, or, you know, whether, so we were doing all this work with the hope that it would be launched, but we didn't know for a long time that actually this was going to be launched. So I think we had to be really mindful and not set people up with these high expectations and disappoint. I think that's a really important piece there.
Yeah, I mean, it took much longer than we thought, Lucy,
Yeah.
on the outset, definitely. And I think, you know, it's such a sensitive subject, even though, you know, Lisa and I were so positive about it and just thought this is going to be brilliant for the business. This is going to be brilliant for the business support. It still is incredibly sensitive because you're talking about people in their careers, in their professions. And actually, what we went with was a business case based on our own career journeys, plus possibly a handful of other people within the business, and there were 85 across the board. So it's really difficult, and that over promising and talking too much about it and not being able to deliver, especially when you don't know the timeline really, because we kind of thought we were making headway, and then something would happen, or we'd learn something new, or there'd be a consequence if we did that elsewhere. And, you know, so it was we had to keep it to a very small, tight-knit group to start with, I think, to help manage that.
Yes, interesting. So how many versions did you go through before you got to your final iteration?
We're still working through it, aren't we?
Still we're working through it. I don't know. It would be good to go back, Lucy, and find out how many meetings did we have with you? Might be better to say that, because every time we had a meeting with you, we'd change it and we go, okay, that's that. So I don't know, is my honest answer. There were a lot, and there were a lot of conversations with you along the way and with Lucy. To say, actually, we didn't think, because even when we were even when we were that far down, we thought, okay, like you, and then you might ask a question, we're like, oh, we didn't think about that one. Okay, all right then. Okay. Oh gosh.
Sorry.
but no. But then you think, oh gosh. But then does that affect that? You know, and you have to. I think going back to the point about individuals, I think for the administration industry, because the titles, and I think job titles was really a sensitive subject, because before this time, the only way that you had any seniority or standing in the business was your job title. Okay, so people were really wedded to their titles and their job titles. So you had to be really sensitive to, like, if we were wanting to change them for all the right reasons, so they could be reflective of all the business skills and tasks that we're increasingly acquiring and performing across the business. It was a genuine need for that. But you also had to be sensitive to people like, well, that's my title. That for me, that's my standing in the business. And when in the administration industry, Lucy, as you know, that areas that if you that title, sometimes in some business, that's all you've got. So for people, it's, what does that mean for me? And I think that's what you have to be really mindful when you're doing something like this as a change program, which is a massive change program. You have to think that everybody, and it may be selfish, but it's right. People go, well, what does that mean for me then? Where does that put me? Where am I now? What does that mean for my career? So you have to be really sensitive and mindful of that for individuals.
I think it's so interesting because it's a conversation I'm having across a lot of businesses, that job title one. And for me, it's wedded to the fact that it's seen so often as a job and not a career. Yeah. And if we're starting to be seen as talent as opposed to a resource, that means that you come away from everything being about job titles and you start to look at behaviours and skills and competencies instead. And that's where you move into it being a career as opposed to being a job. So, that I think very often when you look at businesses that are starting to make this move to restructure their assistants so that there is opportunity and it is a career, it's the first thing that the assistants go, oh, my job title. But understanding that actually with the global skills matrix, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, purely to get away from that and to start moving into companies being able to map what they've got, but also to look at what the core skills and competencies and behaviours are, as opposed to it just being a job title and whatever we might like to throw at you.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think also, Lucy, you know, as Lisa has said, you very rightly challenged us on a few of our meetings, which we did take away, and it did make us rethink things again. But actually, there were some things that after our discussions, we thought, that's fine in, you know, the grand scheme of things, but actually you have to localize what's right for the company that you're in. And so there were some things we would take on board from you and Lucy Chamberlain and think, actually, we can make a change here. And there were others where we thought, that's not going to work for Knight Frank. And actually, we do need to do this because of X, Y, and Z. So I think, you know, it's great having those conversations, and anyone who's going to do this need to have those conversations.
100%.
They need to look outside of their company to see what else is going on. But I think you also must make sure that it's fit for purpose for the company, with one eye on the market and what's going on out there, but fit for purpose for the company that you're in also.
And I think that's what we always said, didn't we? You know, it has to be Knight Frank specific and market specific. So it has the balance to be had on both sides. And also for both businesses at Knight Frank, you know, we're a UK business, but the residential business is slightly different. So their roles, their operational and executive roles are slightly different to some of the ones in commercial. But that doesn't mean that they can't have that mobility and business services, you know, that support the foundational support for the whole of our business. You know, their roles are slightly different in there, but you know, it's having that balance between them that you can still see that mobility, and you can move between the different areas.
So what were the biggest obstacles that you faced?
Gosh, there were a lot. There were a lot. For me, I think it was understanding how the business works and how something like this fits into the wider business structure. I feel like that was the biggest, because we would have so many conversations with HR who were so supportive of the whole project, but because they work across the whole UK business, would always come back with, but we can't do that because of this, or we can't do that. If we do that, it's going to mean this. So I feel that the most obstacles are actually fitting this structure in the wider company structure and getting to understand. But we were only able to do that because we had to learn about what that UK structure was, what that company structure was, and how, and there were loads of compromises that we had to make along the way. And also, I think, I wouldn't have called it an obstacle, but what I think is really key is bringing people on board with you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So not just going to HR saying, right, we've had approval of this, let's implement. Again, that was down to our naivety at the beginning, where we thought, oh, the hard work is done, it's now been approved, let's go. And it was like, oh God, no, the hard work is literally about to start. So that was our naivety. But, you know, bringing people on, there are so many people within the business who are subject matter experts, and we absolutely tapped in, got their counsel, utilised their expertise to work on this project together. And that is really, really key. And I think coming to implementation, it wasn't our project, it wasn't about us, Lucy, it was the company, it was the business's project that they were implementing, and we were just part of that.
Yeah, we facilitated it. We started it, but we didn't. It was a whole team that delivered it. And I think part of that, again, and I wouldn't say a challenge, would be the re-education of the business. True. I think re-education of the stakeholders, and they welcomed it. Not that they challenged it, because that's why I say it wasn't a challenge. They weren't challenging it, but they're just understanding it for them. They're like, and it's still going on now. We're still doing that and welcoming that, you know, and learning, you know, about the roles and the different roles, because, you know, it's not just London focused. We have UK cities, we have our regional offices as well. And each of those areas are different, you know, in Manchester and Leeds, you know, or in Scotland, you know, they do things differently. So, you know, I think we're constantly learning, and we're constantly re-educating, and we're educating ourselves, and also educating the business. So I think it never stops, Lucy. I think you can't, there's never that, what I call that ta-da moment. There never is, because you have to be on top of it, and you have to keep evolving it. So, and there'll always be something that changes for the good, because the business is growing, the business expanding, the world is changing, sustainability and ESG is a massive topic, so everyone's skills and competencies have to grow and have to change with how the world is changing. So the framework has to do that. And we're actually, the business operational and business support framework is now forming part of one UK framework, which is soon to be launched across the business. So that's an exciting journey in itself, that the HR teams and the business have been on that journey they've been doing that for a number, for years. So that, it's going to align with that as well, which is phenomenally exciting. But it is that constant, there is never, there is always that learning, there's always that journey. There's never a destination, because you get to that point where you think it's the destination and the goalposts get moved and there's something else. So you just have to be agile. Agility is really important for this, to be able to move with that, and always gather your knowledge and look back in the market and how it's developing, keeping in touch, and obviously seeing what's happening out in the industry.
So it sounds like you're still rolling it out and that it's changing a lot.
Yeah, yes.
But that moment where you said you felt like, oh, it's done, they said we've got approval. What did that look like? I mean, I know that you're saying that's where the hard work started, but how did you go about rolling it out?
Well, a lot of support. Obviously, we didn't do it on our own. We had HR and we had workshops, etc. So, and our learning and development team. So we got approval through the right boards. So we went to the commercial board and the residential board. So we had the board approval, and then it was up to us to work with our HR teams, our learning and development teams, to come together and to then workshop with the business support across the business. And actually a great learning there as well, with workshops, you have a lot of numbers in there. And you're putting something first up there, like a framework. You're putting up all these job titles. They had prior comms, so comms had come. There's communication, stagger communication, that this was coming and to look forward to it and to sign up to these workshops. But obviously that one workshop, and I remember Christy and I, that first workshop date that went out for the business support to join was oversubscribed. It was like, because everybody had seen that email. They'd been waiting for this for a number of years. You can imagine the anticipation of, what does this look, the career journey look like? So having workshops, but actually then going into workshops and articulating how we got there briefly, the journey and what does it look like, but obviously not being able to answer too many questions because there's a group environment. So we had to present the framework, but then encourage people to have one-to-ones with us, which is where the real work began, because you would find a lot of people having a lot of questions, and naturally so in the workshops, but then it was relevant to them, it was personal to them, so that they could get quite emotive about it, and rightly so. But we're like, look, we can give you the general. This isn't to just, this isn't the only meeting you're going to have. This is what this framework looks like. These are the titles, and this is where people were. And I think what's important is people were positioned in these job titles and where they were operating at that time. So where you were operating at that time was where the job title is. And I think the conversations post the workshops were, what does that mean for me? What does my career journey look like now? And I think Christy would say the same for us. That was the opportunity to sit down with people and say, because people were trying to say, well, I don't think I fit there. I think I fit over there, or I fit in there. Actually, I do more roles, more tasks that you've given me credit for. And I want to have a conversation with you about that, which we welcomed. And I think that was, if I would say anything, that was the most important piece of work that we did. I think we did up to 70, Christy, one-to-ones with individuals. And when you think we've got 90 now, commercial business support, we did, but welcomed them, Lucy. We're not just saying that, we actually encouraged them. I wish we'd have done them all. I wish we'd have done all 90, because we wanted to make sure that each individual understood and was happy and supportive, and where we made mistakes. I think this is really important to say as well, because we do make mistakes, and there were a couple of areas in the framework where some individual went, well, how does that work? You know, I wouldn't go to too much detail, but why does that span over that category? And we looked back at it and we questioned ourselves. And actually, we went back to that individual and said, you know what, you're right. You know, that doesn't work, actually. So we went to Stephen, head of commercial, and said, look, you know, this actually isn't right. And because of this and that. And what an amazing thing to go back to them and say, you were right. You know, we didn't check that one. So we're going to change it. And thank you. And we did that with a couple of business cases. People put business cases to say, this is my role. You know, can we go into it in more detail? I do this and I do this and this. And we sat there and we listened with their department head and we brought their stakeholder in as well. And we changed and we moved them, you know, to a different title because where they were operating. And that's really important. So I think if there was any takeaway for anyone that was thinking of doing this, I would say engage and spend time with individually when you can, when you roll it out, having those one-to-one conversations, because they're really important to make people feel listened, heard, and that they understand. And secondly, workshop then your managers as well. So we have operational managers that line manage business support in the structure. We set up a structure where it wasn't the stakeholders. The stakeholders still manage their business support, but line manage from a stakeholder business perspective. But we set up a structure as well where we have subject matter experts in administration, operational managers, line managing day to day the business support. So they work in partnership with the stakeholders. So when it comes to appraisals, that you've got both support there. You've got your stakeholder with the business and the growth of the business, and you've got your operational manager from an administration point of view coming together to say, this is how we can support you and support your development.
I love that. You know, what I really want to know from you, Christy, is how you managed to balance that with doing the day-to-day role. Because, I mean, this is just so much work and very rewarding work. And you have changed the lives of the assistants that are at Knight Frank. But, you know, you all had day jobs too, right?
Yeah, I mean, totally. Yeah. And that's one thing I was going to add to what Lisa said, is that anyone who is thinking about doing it, obviously do it, because it can be brilliant. But don't underestimate the amount of time that it will take, because even ahead of the workshops and the one-to-ones with each of the business support, we had workshops with all the senior stakeholders to talk them through the framework so they understood it. So actually we could be going into this once launched on the same page, and that took a lot of time. And there's no answer really, Lucy. There's no solution. You just have to fit it in. And so we spent a lot of evenings together and individually. I mean, we're talking about over the last 5 or 6 years now. I personally worked a lot at the weekends, but you just, if it's something you're really, really passionate about doing, you'll find time to do it. And it's something that we both, because at that point, Lucy, let's not forget, at that point, our roles had changed individually as well. So during this time, you know, this all started from us wanting to do more within our roles, us wanting more of a challenge to add more value across the wider business and not just in our immediate places. During this whole time that we were looking and doing this business plan, our roles changed, and they did change, which was brilliant. So I think we could have quite easily said, oh, do you know what, we're actually fine now. We're okay. We've got our career development path. We've got our career pathway. We're okay. This is actually going to be a lot of work. Do we really want to do this? But we were so passionate about wanting people within the business to understand the value of the business support and the operational network. We wanted the business to see and to feel how much value, to understand how much can change, how much fee earner time could be saved if we got this structure right, that we wanted to continue with it. And I think we just made a kind of pact to kind of say, we're going to see this to the end. It doesn't matter how long it takes. We'll see it through and see where it ends up. And it is hard, and it is a lot of time. And you do think you take 10 steps forward and you take 2 steps back all the time. But when you get to the point of last July, when you're actually launching it and you see now the business support in the new structure, how they feel. Lisa leads it now. She works with all the operational managers. She has constant, and how it can now be going wider across the UK business. It's phenomenal to see. So if you're really, really passionate about doing something, it's going to take more of your time. And that's just something I think you need to accept.
And I
Yes.
think, Christy, for us, it was our purpose. And I think
Yeah.
once you tap into something that is your purpose, it doesn't feel like work, Lucy. You know, it was hard. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure Ernie for Christy and Barry for me would have thought, well, it did for us because we didn't see you. And I'm sure if you ask them, it would have been a completely different story. But actually they're so proud, you know, and our kids as well. And what a thing to say. I mean, I have a 20-year-old daughter, a 24-year-old son, and you know, they are so proud of the work that Christy and I have done, and they look back at that and they say it's phenomenal. But it's not about our work, it's the work, it's everybody. Because actually, if we didn't have the phenomenal talent that we had in the business, you know, it wouldn't have flourished as much. It's flourished because we've got the talent in the business, and they are phenomenal, and they're developing, and they're taking it, and they're driving it, and they're adding value. So it's not one or two, it's a combination of people that you always get there. And for us, I think, like Christy and I, you know, it's yes, it felt hard at times, and if you want something that badly, you're not going to do it coming in at 9:30, going at 5:30, working Monday to Friday. That's just unfortunately, that is the reality. If you want something so badly and you have to invest in time, if you want to learn something, if you want to gain knowledge in something else, or learn a new course, you know, anything, it's going to take time in your personal time. It's just, and you don't have to. Listen, it's not saying that you have to, but if you really want to do something like that, then it does take that time, and it takes an investment on your behalf too. But I don't regret it for one moment. If, you know, I can look back when I retire and look back at Knight Frank and think, God, you know, look at what we achieved. Even now, I'm done. Even if I, you know, tomorrow, if I look back and said that was it, you know, I'm just so proud of everybody in the business and everybody that's been on our journey to get it here.
Just amazing, which is why I wanted to interview you. What are you what are you proudest of? Christy, I'm going to come to you first, I think, actually.
I think winning hearts and minds. I think winning hearts and minds from the business, because, you know, my previous boss was hugely supportive of me wanting to get involved in things and do lots, and, you know, but it was still, please do it, but don't do it on my watch. I'm kind of leaving in a couple of years, and, you know, wait for the next evolution of people to come in and help support you, because it sounds like a lot of work from me and I don't quite understand it and stuff like that. So I think winning hearts and minds from the business and showing them genuinely how much value something like this can help the business in the kind of whole D&I piece, in terms of the, you know, return for investment for the business, the value that it adds. And then I think also winning hearts and minds from business support, because you know, that took a long time. That took a long time, because there were a lot of people like, oh, Amanda, what are you doing? Why are you getting involved in stuff like that? And, you know, I want to talk about it and stuff. And I think bringing everyone on that journey and understanding how it can really add incredible value to both sides, I think is probably the proudest achievement, I think, for me.
Amazing. And Lisa?
All of that. And I think the being able to have an opportunity for the business support to be part of the partnership, you know, that never happened before. So, you know, as a business support, you couldn't join, you couldn't be promoted to associate or partner, but now that's gone. So if you at that level,
haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. And also, I think it was like a proud moment for us when Laura, who was an operations manager in the city, who's a phenomenal operator, and she line managed 12 13 business support in our London offices subdivision when she was promoted to associate. So the first individual in the commercial business as business support promoted was just so, for us, that was a real proud moment. And I think, and you know, for Laura, but also for everybody, they've stepped up, you know, now, you know, because we say it's, you know, you've got the framework now, the accountability is on you, it's in your hands now as well, right? It's not just the business will give you the tools, but you as an individual need to have accountability and responsibility to get yourself there as well. You know, it's a two-way street, and wow, you know, there's some amazing people, and it's just how people are flourishing is really, it's been amazing to see.
Fantastic. So what's next? What happens next? Because you're not done and dusted. You're still working on it, aren't you?
So very much.
Lisa is, she's now leading this. This is her baby.
So I suppose just keeping it evolving, speaking to you, Lucy, coming out. I think I need to do, for me and for the team, for the commercial business support, it's looking after everyone's journey, making sure everybody has a level playing field. So I'm doing a lot of work with our UK cities offices at the moment. So, you know, the framework, if you remember, was only launched last year. So it's early days. And now it's evolving into the bigger framework across the business. So there's a lot of work to be done on that framework. There's a lot of workshops and with managers, and I think it's a real key point for our managers that, you know, they have a lot on their plate. They have to learn, you know, to be able to manage effectively, run appraisals effectively, run to ones effectively. They need a lot of support with the world changing. So it'll be, I think the next year will be really concentrating on them so they can be really confident in their role and managing their business support to be the best that they can be, and supporting the stakeholders in the UK cities offices as well to make sure that they're having, and I'm joining their appraisals so that they have that level playing field. It's not just London centric. You know, that's really important for the business, that it's equal for everybody, no matter where you're based, and you have the same opportunities. So that's sort of a real focus on that area. And then the learning, and then the culture of learning, I think the development piece, because we talk about there's a framework here, but it will be the training aligned to that. And that could be, you know, that might be structured training we have in that business. It might be bespoke training that people want to do, that they feel will help their role, and we can support them in that. Or it could be other people in the business that are phenomenal subject matter experts that we want to highlight, that people can go to and utilize them, because we're doing that in the business support as well. You know, we have some phenomenal people that are, you know, CDD experts or process efficiency experts, and we utilize them already to train and to mentor and coach other individuals in business support. So it's looking at that in detail.
Amazing. And if you were each, just to finish, to give one piece of advice to people who are looking at it and thinking about starting the journey, what would you say? Christy, I'm going to come to you first.
Do it, but do your research. You know, ask people, speak to stakeholders, you know, really build up the reason, you know, the why for it all. Why do you need to do it from a business? And always look at it, as you said quite rightly, Lucy and Anthony, this is one of the first things that Anthony challenged us on when we first went through the business plan was, but why would the business do it? I completely get it from your perspective, but why would the business? So get your why right. And it doesn't matter how many people you speak to understand that in more detail. Bring people in confidently, confidentially. And then what is the solution? You have to come up with what that solution looks like for the business to actually really understand and take note, and to really be engaged and interested in it. I don't think they would have been half as interested if we just went with the why.
Yeah.
You know, there's an operational level missing. Okay, what do we do about it? So I think have that solution. Your solution doesn't need to be watertight, so don't worry. It doesn't have to be the most perfect plan, because these things do evolve, especially the more people that you speak to and the more that you understand about the business. And just go for it, and don't fear someone saying no, because we had a lot of no's along the way, obstacles, no's, whatever you want to call them. There were a lot, and there were areas that we compromised on and stuff, but you know, it didn't mean that they weren't supportive of what we were doing. So definitely do it, but make sure you have done your research.
And I would just add to that, listen as well.
Yeah.
Really, really listen to people along the journey that want to help and support, because they're invaluable, you know.
Yeah.
And the confidence that just, there's a reason that you're thinking of doing it. If you have been thinking of doing something like this for a long time, there is a purpose in you that is driving you to do that. So go with it. You will learn on the journey. You will learn. You will get more confidence on the journey. If I look back at where we were 4 years ago, 5 years at Christy, you know, we weren't as confident about it as we are now. We would keep saying, oh, what did we say about that? Or, you know, I think, you know, confidence comes, but it's having that passion and believing in yourself, that there's a lot that you can go forward and small steps. I would say incremental steps. Don't look too far ahead. Don't think yet. You can say, okay, that's the ambition. This is the why, this is the RI, and this is the ambition, but then forget it. Okay, forget that's the ambition, and then head down, and then really do take some advice, listen, get some mentors, and just look at those incremental steps, because those incremental steps are the ones that give you the big wins. Those incremental steps are the ones that go, wow, oh my gosh, that's a really big hurdle. We've got through that. And they're the ones that will get you onto it. If you look too far ahead, it will scare you. It was, you know, so just set your ambition and then come back and just take your time, and it will take as long as it takes. Don't be in a rush. I would say just don't rush it. It needs to be done properly.
You know, I knew when I invited you that it would be hugely inspiring, and I think there will be a lot of the assistants out there who will just have listened to that and go, wow. So I would like to thank you both hugely, not just for the interview, but for all the work that you've done, because you haven't just changed the lives of the assistants at Knight Frank. You are a beacon for other companies out there to look at and to see how they're going to do it. So both of you, thank you very much for the last hour, and thank you for all the work that you've done.
Our pleasure.
Thank you,
very
Lucy.
much. Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Just amazing. Thank you.
Hey, see you later.